Hello and welcome to this Affinity Photo and Affinity Designer tutorial to do this sort of fake embroidery effect. Now, this all came about from a Photoshop tutorial which is done by PSD Dude, where he had this effect here, and there is also links to the jean image and to the silk effect here as well. I will add these links to this tutorial, but they are basically from higher textures for Photoshop. So we've got the green texture there, and we have the denim texture. Now you don't have to stick with either of those textures, you can use your own textures. I mean, you could also go to somewhere like this, which is osbeta.com, and you could select any of these embroidery, and you've even got that green one there as well. So you don't have to stick with either the denim that I'm going to use or the silk effect. Now I'm going to be doing this in Affinity Photo, but you can do all of these steps apart from the very last bit in Affinity Designer, and that last bit is just using the warp mesh to sort of swivel it around a bit. Now I did originally do this only as a written tutorial because there are an awful lot of steps and it sort of might be hard to sort of remember and follow what's going on, so I did it as a written tutorial, and it was made as a link in the Fans of Serif Software Facebook group which I run, and I also added a link in Dropbox as well. So I will add the Dropbox links in the instructions for this video, mainly because, as I said, there are a lot of steps and it would be easier to follow possibly as a written tutorial. But I've had people ask for a video tutorial, so I'm going to start and do this now. So let me just close that down, and this is the version I did in Designer. Like I said, I can't sort of swivel it around as easy as you probably could as we can in Photo, so I'm going to just do it in Photo. So I'm going to sort of finish resetting these things and I'll be back in a sec. Okay, to start this tutorial, I've opened the Denim Texture and the green embroidery texture. Now in the PSD tutorial he added a levels adjustment and just darkened it down a little bit, so I'm just going to move the black slider just over so it comes near to the edge of this line here, so it's about 7%. You don't have to, and if you've got a different texture you probably won't need to, but I'm trying to stick to the Photoshop tutorial as close as I could get to adapt it. So next we're going to need text layer. So in fact what I will do is I will merge that down so I just have the one layer. So I'm going to come to the artistic text and I'm going to make the color white, and then I'm going to pick a nice bold font because you want to be able to see the texture within the font, so you don't really want a thin font, and I'm going to use this attack font, which seems to be my favorite at the moment, and I'll just draw this out and let's go with Affinity, and then I'll just reposition this and there we go, got that centered. So we have the Affinity. Now I will just slightly lower the size of this, right about there. So once you're happy with whichever text you want have picked, and the size and the position of it, well, first thing we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this, so we have three more times, so we end up with 4 copies of this. So you can either press Ctrl and J, or you can come up to layer and duplicate, or you can right click on the icon here and come down to duplicate. So and this one's I'm going to press Ctrl and J for these ones, so I have 4 copies of that. And just to make this slightly easier, I'm just going to rename them. So that's 1, 2, 3 and 4. And then I'm going to turn off the top 3 and just come down to the bottom layer. So on the bottom layer, the first thing I'm going to do is change the blend mode from normal to soft light, so that you can just about see the wording in the denim texture. And then we're going to add effects to this, and you can do this by clicking on the FX icon that's down here in the layers panel, and then it will open the layers effect. Now, as I said at the beginning of this video, there are lots of different steps in this. Nearly all of these 4 text layers will have effects added to them, and some of them are very minor changes, and sometimes I can't even see where the change is, but you can either stick to those settings or find your own settings. Go with what you like, not necessarily how this turns out would be my best advice, but I'm going to stick as closely as I can to the Photoshop tutorial, but you don't necessarily need to stick to that settings in this one. So when we have the effects open, the first thing I'm going to do is inner shadow. So I'm going to put a tick in the inner shadow box and then click on the word inner shadow to give me the options. That will be the same with all the ones that we may pick. Put a tick in the box and then click on the name to get your options. So we're going to keep the multiply blend mode. Opacity we're going to keep at 50%. Radius is going to be 2. Offset is going to be 5. And intensity is also going to be 5. I'm going to keep the color black. I'm going to change the angle from 315, which is pointing down here, to be pointing up in that direction, so the angle is 135. So next we're going to add inner glow, so put a tick in there, click on the word to get the options. So at the moment the blend mode is screen, but we're going to change that to normal and set the opacity to 10. And the radius to 13, and the intensity to 10, and we're going to leave the color white, and we're going to have it on edge, which it already is by default, I think you find. So next we're going to click on bevel and emboss, and for this we're going to change the type from pillow to outer. We're going to have a radius of 10 and soften by 1 pixel, and we're going to change the direction, and I'm going to change the azimuth to -60 and the elevation to 64, and the highlights at the moment is set on the screen, so I'm going to click in that white box there and I'm going to change it from screen to color dodge, and the opacity will be 35%, or as close as 36, that's close enough. And shadow, I'm going to leave it on multiply, but I'm going to lower that opacity down to roughly 40%. Okay. And the last is the color overlay. So I'll click on that, get that for the options. Blend mode I'm going to leave on normal, opacity down to about 80%. You're just starting to see the texture of the denim coming through, and going to leave the color on black. So I can close that now, and you can, if you want, at this point you could lower the overall opacity for that layer down a bit more if you want to see a bit more of that texture coming through, but not really. If you want to leave it like at that, for example, make it look like it's been maybe singed into the material, but as we're going to be adding extras on top of this, you don't really need to do that. That's just a case of whether you want to stop at this point. So we're coming to layer number 2 now of the text. I'm going to highlight it and unhide it. Now I'm going to keep the blend mode as normal, and we're going to add the effects again. So click on the FX panel, and we're going to go with outer shadow. So I'm going to tick in the box, click on the word to get the options, leave the blend mode on multiply. I'm going to change the angle again so it's pointing in the opposite direction, so that's 135. Opacity I'm going to make 75%, and an offset of 1, and leave the color black, and I'm going to leave all the other settings on 0. Then we're going to come to inner shadow, click on the word to get the options, leave the blend mode on multiply, opacity 60%, radius 9, offset we'll leave at 0, and intensity 16. And we're going to leave the color black, and we're going to leave the angle still as it is on 315. So then we're going to come to inner glow, and the blend mode of this is going to be overlay, and the opacity will be 100% as it is, radius of 4, and intensity and leaving it at 50%, and leave the color white, but we want to sort of add some noise to this, so I'm going to click on the white box here, and at the bottom here we have noise, so I'm just going to move that right the way over to the right just to add a bit of noise to the white. You can't necessarily see it, well I can't necessarily see it, but this is what the chap did, so I'm sort of repeating that step. And next we're going to go with outline, So I'm going to click on outline, click on the word for the options, and the blend mode for this is going to be normal. The radius is going to be 18, and actually it should be 2. Sorry, I'm reading the wrong bit. That should be 2, and the opacity is at 75, roughly 76. That will do, and the alignment will be changed from outside to inside, and the color, I'm going to change this to a green that is similar to the silk effect that we're going to be going for, and I'm going to use the hex slider options for this, and the color I'm going to pick is going to be 00 FFBF, which is sort of this light green effect. Now if you're using a different color texture, or you can even recolor this green texture, I would suggest that you would pick a similar color to the end color that you are going to go for. So then we're going to come to bevel and emboss, and the type is going to be inner, radius is 18, and the azimuth is going to be like it was in the previous one, so that's minus 60 and 64 for the elevation. Highlights, I'm going to change this to overlay, and I'm going to keep that at 75%. Shadows, I'm going to leave a multiply and reduce that down, opacity to around 55, 56. There we go, 56. I'm going to leave the soften on 0, and that should be, I believe, all the settings for this text layer, so I can close that down. So what we now need is the green texture, or whichever texture that you're going to go with. So I'm going to just right click on that and copy, and I'm going to come back and edit and paste that in between levels 2 and level 3. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on the logo and keep the button pressed down and drag it down into level 2, making it a child of that level, like that. So when you do that, you have a blue line coming across, and it will go just as far as the icon, and then it will make that a child of level 2 and put the texture inside the text. So then we want to unhide level 3, so I'm going to highlight it and unhide it, and we're going to change the blend mode of this to darken, and then open the effects panel again, and the first one we got is inner shadow, and the blend mode is going to be overlay, and 50% opacity. The radius is going to be 10. Offset I'm going to leave at 0, and intensity at 9. I'm going to leave the color black, and the angle this time I'm going to type in a size rather than move the little blue dial around. So if I click on the number, it will give me the option to type in a number, and I'm going to make this 290. Press return. Then I'm going to come to the bevel and emboss options, and I'll click on the word to give me the options for that. Now that sort of doesn't look too bad as it is now, so at this point you could save it, or we can carry on. So I'm going to change the type on this from pillow to inner, and we have a radius of 5, which it is already, and soften, I'm going to make 1. The colour I'm going to leave as, well, there's no colour, sorry, and the azimuth is going to be again the -60 and elevation 64. Then the highlights, I'm going to leave the screen and 75, and shadows multiply and 75. So I can now close that down, the FX panel. So again, like I said before, if you're happy with how it looks, you can leave it here and save it and what have you. But we're now going to move on to the level layer number 4 and unhide that one. And again, we're going to change the blend mode from normal to darken, and again open the effects panel, and this time we're going to go with outer shadow, the blend mode is going to be multiply, the opacity is going to be 75%, 74, that's near enough, a radius of 2, offset 0, and intensity of 6. The color is black and the angle is 135, so that is the opposite of where we were. And then it comes to inner shadow, and blend mode multiply, which it already is, opacity 75, a radius of 75, the offset is 33, and the intensity is 34. And I'm going to leave the color black, and the angle is going to be 135 again, like it was before in the previous steps. And then close that. So to all intents and purposes, that would be the end of the tutorial, and it definitely is the end, sort of, if you're doing this in Affinity Designer. You can alter the perspective of this a bit, especially in Affinity Photo, and to do that you need to right click the top layer and do merge visible, so you have a layer that has all of the previous layers all set, and then come to the perspective tool. Let me just zoom out slightly. Right, let me just take this grid off a second. So you've got the white bounding box with the 4 corners in, and you could then just alter this because you've still got the layers underneath that will help you sort of keep that seam going, for example, and move that like that. Say something like that, and then I'll click apply, and then Control and 0 to zoom back out again. So you're just slightly altering the perspective of it. I haven't gone too far with that, mainly because I've made the text a bit too close to the edge. But that is the end of the tutorial. So you can also add a sort of high pass filter effect if you want to sharpen it up a bit. But that is the end. This is the version 1 of this. I'm going to be doing a slightly less complicated and different looking version in another video. Quickly, before I go, I forgot something, so I'm quickly tacking it on the end here. Let me just hide that top visible layer which I altered. I just wanted to mention that if you wanted to change the color of this green, you could either do that before you brought it in. From this level you could have recolored it to whichever color you wanted and then copied it in, or once you've got it into this project you can highlight the layer and then add a recolor adjustment and change it to whichever color that you want, like the look of. Say for example a yellowy gold like that, and you could lower the saturation or even the blend mode, whichever you like the look of. And then when you got up to the top here, then you could do the visible merging and then the warping. So don't just stick with the color that it's given you or the texture that it's given you. Make the changes as you see fit. So this is finally the end of this video. Thank you for watching and goodbye.